tried to get this in last night, but we had a few conflicts. So that's what we're going to talk about today, actually. So welcome back to Assessment Immersion Training. Good morning, Robert, and whoever else is out there. And today, as we have been, we're getting into the finer points, the more intricate aspects of what we've been covering here in this immersion training in Master Coach University. We go very deep in these what we call immersion trainings, where we study very deeply a particular discipline of coaching, particular type of coaching, an approach to coaching, and really master the skills and learn by doing it. Actually get into the process of coaching and get feedback from our clients, find out what we could do better and better as well. So in this particular set of approaches, this is what I call live streams. The purpose for these is, as I just mentioned, that we only have so much time in the training sessions to cover deeper aspects of, or more, let's say, various and sundry aspects, more details of what we're doing, of our coaching techniques, of our approaches, our tools, in this case, in assessment immersion training, because we're using tools throughout our work in assessment training. We're literally using psychographic profiling tools in order to inform on, accelerate, and help to boost our coaching to the next level for individuals, groups, businesses, families, relationships, careers. I mean, there's a ton of outputs. Those of you in the training know that. So anyway, today, let's get to it. We're going to talk about conflict, how your client's conflict actually impacts them. And what's great about what we do with these assessments and what these assessments can give us is they can identify conflicts. They can identify conflicts. In fact, a couple weeks ago, a couple live streams ago, I even shared with you, and I'll just bring it back very briefly, a client that I had his assessment results, and I did what you might call a discovery session with him, and I identified a conflict. I said, look, you're conflicted. You're working your business, and you're having to give all this time up and give all this freedom up for your business, but you love the freedom that you hope to get from your business, but you're not getting it from your business. So you're very conflicted. You have a conflict, and your conflict is that you want freedom from your business, but you also know that you have to give up that freedom in order to run your business, grow your business, and ultimately win in your business. So getting your freedom also means giving up your freedom, at least for a certain period of time. And in some ways it does. And I further went on to coach that individual by saying, look, if you really want to be free, you're also free to sacrifice something. Famous story of sacrifice, Jesus, right? He sacrifices himself so that, everyone may be saved, right? That took a certain amount of strength and also an existential choice, according to the story, at least, right? And that choice is something that not every, Tom, Dick, and Harry on the street is free to make, right? They're constrained by their fears. They're constrained by their own weaknesses, let's say, right? So they're in a prison of that. According to the myth, Jesus was not. So anyway, I didn't share that with him, but I'm exemplifying now. But I shared with him, I said, if you're really free, you're also free to take action on something that doesn't necessarily feel free, but it is free because it's something that you would normally not do because you're so addicted to the freedom. So how's that for self-referential and a little confusing, but it worked. He got, gosh, I'm not giving up freedom. I'm actually free enough to not be so chained by my neediness, to not have to work all the time and not have to sacrifice and just do whatever I want. It's like I could actually have real freedom, even though it doesn't necessarily feel free in the moment. There's a difference between freedom and feeling free, right? A lot of people feel free. They're not free at all, right? They're stuck in their own little prison of their beliefs or values or ideas or styles or instincts or whatever. as this gentleman was before I actually coached him on this. And so he signed up for coaching, but it's interesting. I mean, a lot of times there's a lag between when someone signs up for coaching, when they have their first coaching session, their first paid coaching session, right? And so it had been like a month and a half since this guy had signed up for coaching, and I hadn't really talked to him. And so I had a session with him, first official paid session. And I said, hey, how's it going? And he said, yeah, ever since that session, I've been working on my SOPs. And for those that don't know, an SOP is just standard of procedure. It's basically like a manual for the business, right? It's like operational texts, and they're usually like thick as a brick, right? And they're boring as heck. I mean, it's like stereo instructions, right? It's not fun stuff. And he's just been grinding this stuff out. He has now produced an operational manual for, he runs events. He's runs this company that allows you to like install a photo booth at an event so people can take pictures at the event, which is a big thing nowadays with events, like that you could take a picture. But it's fairly automatic and it's really efficient. He can make a lot of money doing it, right? And now that COVID is starting to open up, events are starting to happen again. So he's got this giant, 80, several hundred page manual. I don't know exactly how long it is that he's built over the last couple months that he now ships out with his operators to the event so they can do things exactly right. And he could just be hands off and be free from having to, be the mother goose of these events, right? So it's interesting how this came back full circle. He wants the freedom. He gave up freedom, so to speak. He really was free enough to do this, but he gave it the feeling of freedom so that he could write all those SOPs and grind out these thick manuals. And now he's printing these manuals for his operators to go out and run the events for him. And he could be free while they do that. And he just makes money. He just prints money. Talking about freedom, right? The reason I mention this though is that he had one session with me and he transformed. Even before he started coaching, he did. And that's because I supported him, and my main line of that first free session was to resolve a conflict that he had within himself. He had what we're going to talk about today, what's called a me conflict. He was conflicted within himself, an internal conflict. So, the point of this is that almost all conflicts, I'm sorry, back up, I'm misreading this. Early day, almost all clients that you'll work with are impacted by conflict. Almost every client you're going to work with, they're impacted by some kind of conflict, right? And, yes, you are probably conflicted in some way, or you have conflicts in your life, conflicts in yourself, conflicts in your life. And there's an impact to that, right? Like people don't have conflict in their life. I mean, look at the world, like look at American politics. Like you don't think there's an impact to conflict. You're not paying attention, right? There is an impact to these conflicts, not just the issues, not just the fact that, well, one group thinks that we shouldn't have to do X, Y, and Z, and the other group thinks we should, right? It's the conflict that happens between those different ideas, instincts, value sets, belief systems, groups, behaviors that actually creates a third result beyond just resolving and deciding which way should we go or how do we split the difference in that negotiation, right? There's a literal impact to that. People die as a result of those conflicts. People get sick as a result of those conflicts. People get emotionally wrecked as a result of those conflicts. Relationships start and end as a result of those conflicts. I mean, you look at the world, you see like a major aspect of the world that you're seeing is conflict all the time. In fact, you guys go through Internet Coaching Client Machine with us very soon. It's coming up next semester. If you're watching this later, maybe not. But one of the things that we talk about is like part of what you need to do as a marketer is get attention, right? You need to get attention from your audience. And we know the ways to get attention. You know, it's like scientifically proven what gets attention, regardless of what your subject matter is. If you cover, basically, it's like 4 things, right? It's like it's money, violence, sex, and power. Those 4 things, right? There's a couple others, but basically those 4 things, you're going to get attention. You go to CNN today or go to any news outlet and look at the headlines. I guarantee 9 out of 10 of those headlines are money, violence, sex, power headlines. Usually a combination of those, right? So those headlines or those subject matter much of them denotes conflict. Power always denotes some conflict because it's like, you know, power is a dominating influence, right? Money usually creates some level of conflict, right? Violence literally is the physical manifestation of conflict, right? So I'm sure there's some kind of sex conflict going on out there as well, right? So the point of the matter is your client, you and everyone around you, the businesses, the groups, etc., they're all impacted by conflict. I mean, I was actually I was even conflicted as to whether or not yesterday, when I was about to do this live stream, I was about to start working on it. At least I was conflicted as to whether I should work out, stretch, meditate, or work on the live stream. Like, that was a conflict I was dealing with, like managing the conflict of what to do with the time that I had yesterday. And then, so I said, you know what? You know, I got to do my live stream. I'm going to start working on my live stream. So then my daughter shows up and she said, you know, Dad, you want to go for a walk, right? And, you know, you got a 10-year-old daughter. How many of them come to you and ask you to go for a walk, right? But, you know, she had nothing better to do, I guess. So she asked me to go for a walk. And how do I resolve that, right? I mean, I'm like, well, you know, I got to work on this live stream. You know, I got to do this live stream tonight. And, you know, my daughter wants to, you know, go for a walk with her dad. So these are some of my conflicts. These are my conflicts in the form of graphs, right? So, and you know, those of you who understand this technology, you'll know what I'm talking about here. If you don't, just bear with me here. It's going to get a little technical. But I happen to be naturally an high I and a high S. I won't get into the rest of the scores, but I'm very, very high I, very high S. These are the people-oriented aspects of a behavioral style, a behavioral graph, right? But I've adapted down in at least my most recent graph, which is not that, I mean, I don't take this every year, so maybe like 5 years ago, I've adapted down to a low I, low S, okay? Let's just assume that's still the case. It may not be. Adaptations change, but that's my adaptation, right? So I've lost my people orientation, so to speak, as an adaptation, right? And I've picked up the pace. I'm moving faster, but also my optimism has gone way, way down, at least at this point in my life. And then on top of that, here's my values, right? I'm just looking at my lowest value and my top 3. I actually used to be really high regulatory, but I'm high economic. I'm economically driven, but my highest value is theoretical. It's all about teaching and learning for me. I prioritize that for over everything, including money. Like, if I lose money, but I can learn something, I'm willing to do that, right? I'm an altruist, though, as well. So I have a conflict between altruism and economics. As an altruist, I want to give. And these are really close. Like, altruist is a little bit lower than economic. That's after, 20 years of being beaten into the ground by business. That economic starts to get a little higher. It used to be the opposite. And then my regulatory, which is basically like following traditions, rules, principles, and beliefs, has gone through the full. I mean, I used to be high, like I said, but it's really, really low, right? So I'm all about breaking with tradition to teach and learn, and knowledge is power, while I give and take in the world, right? I give a lot to the world, but I also want to get a lot back, right? I want to maximize my ability to give and receive as well. Like, those are my values, okay? And then over here in the attributes, which is really just how I think, is my cognition, I'm just going to show you a couple of these. I'm going to show you my entire dimensional balance, but I have a really high empathy. Like there have been times when I've taken the attributes index, when I've literally scored 10 out of 10 on the empathy. Okay, so super high psychic ability, right? Empathy, but I have a slightly negative bias. You can see that in the tachometer and the gauge here. It's a little bit negative, and you know the down arrow there, and also my sense of self, which is kind of like self empathy, is lower, but it's not super low, but it's extremely negative. So in other words, I understand how people feel, but you know, I don't put that on a pedestal. Like I might utilize and leverage those feelings in order to manipulate and cause people to make a decision that might be different than they originally would have made based upon those feelings, right? It's good. It's like an influencer. Think of that like a good salesperson, good marketer, good influencer. Bit of a manipulative kind of thing, right? But I mean, that could be for better or for worse, right? Manipulation a lot of times has negative connotations, unfortunately. But you know, so be it. I'm a manipulator. But my sense of self still, you know, understand how I feel. I used to not at all. I used to have a really low sense of self, but a really negative bias, meaning that I either don't feel great about myself, or at the time that I took this, that I didn't really care how I felt, right? So these are my, like, think of these as like different aspects of my instincts, my beliefs and values and emotions, and then my cognition. And you can already start to see some conflicts here. You can see some conflicts in the adaptations that I've made. That's going to conflict. That's going to have me be somewhat conflicted. You can see an economic versus an altruistic motivation. That's going to create conflict as well. And then you also see, to some extent, a conflict between feeling for others and feeling for myself, right? Although there's one, which is feeling for others, is much less of a negative bias, at least. Although I'm not crazy about feelings either way, it looks like, right? So these are my graphs. So what do you think happened with my daughter? What do you think happened? She came, asked me to go for a walk. I got business to do. You know, I got to get ready for my day off, and I got to get this live stream done. A lot of important stuff to share with you. Well, you probably know what happened if you're watching this live, but can you guess, based upon all of this, what I decided to do? And you could make a lot of like judgment calls as to, well, you know, he's naturally high I and high empathy, so he went for the walk because he cares about his daughter. Or he's economically driven, you know, and that's higher than his altruist, so he just went for the money and did his business, told his daughter to go away. Or, hey, he was going to do a live stream, so that's teaching and learning, so that means that, you know, he prioritized that over everything else, right? But, you know, he also is low regulatory, so maybe he broke his own rules that he needed to do the live stream, right? And so if you haven't already figured it out, what I did is I went on the walk. Yes, there you go. Yeah, and Robert said it right before I said it. So you nailed it, Robert. You win the pop quiz for today. But I went on the walk, but I also made it short. We walked down to the end of the street and came back, right? So a different parent, right? A different me probably would have had a half-hour walk, or would have just played with his daughter for an hour, or the rest of the day, take the rest of the day off. But with my theoretical economic, right? And my, at least with that, not to mention my chance that I can also contribute in my business, would have it so that I'm going to shorten that a bit. I've adapted to a lower I, so I want to be more pragmatic, more of a realist, not so optimistic that I can just spend a half hour and I'll still make it tonight, right? To do the live stream. My empathy is high, but it has a negative bias, so I can manipulate my way with my daughter to shorten that walk, right? Very easily, right? Because that's like a skill set for me, you know. And even though I may not feel great that I cut that walk short, you know, like I don't care how I feel, right? Not to mention I don't care that much about how other people feel either, you know. So even for my daughter, who I love, it's like, okay, well, she may not feel perfect about this, but she'll get over it. And I know that, and I understand that as well. Plus, again, I can utilize why I need to do this live stream. We can't do that long. Can have the longest walk in the world, right? So now you might have interpreted this differently. Well, that's fine. This is not about perfectly predicting human behavior. See, Robert says, high I, high S, eco, return on investment, went on a walk. Right. So what if I think a walk is not a high return on investment, though? I see it as important. Why would I see it as important? Well, I empathize with my daughter and my relationship with her. Feelings matter to me enough. I mean, at least I understand those feelings enough to know that they kind of matter, even if I think of them as a necessary evil, right? And, I want to teach her too, and I want to give to her too, right? And I do get something, but it's not necessarily the ROI of, doing this, amazing live stream from my perspective, compared to I could do the walk anytime, right? But also remember who I really am, which is who I really am with my daughter, is really high I. So I'm very people oriented, and really high S, which is a more kind of family oriented people orientation, right? It's a loyalty, right? So that part of me that is so loyal and loving, so to speak, or optimistic, optimism in me says I can make it all work. And the loyal family man in me said, I need to go on a walk, if I have the flexibility, which I did. And of course, that flexibility allows me to break those rules, right? So I know this might sound fairly complicated for those that are uninitiated, but if you understand these graphs, you could probably somewhat either predict that or see what the tendency would be. Now, does that mean that's exactly the decision I would make? What mood might I have been in? How much pressure did I feel I was under? What was going on with me and my daughter at the time, right? So there's all these other potential phenomenon or conflicts that obviously could skew that decision, right? And I have the existential choice, no matter what any of these patterns are, to go on the walk or not, or make it long or make it short or whatever. And it ended up being that I went on the walk and it was fairly short, but I still, considering I really wanted to teach something great in the live stream, I still didn't quite get the live stream in last night, if you haven't noticed, right? It was too late, and it was like, okay, we're going to do it the next morning, even though this is my day off. And now I got to decide to do this on my day off. And now my wife is like, well, you could even have a day off. I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to get this done in the morning, right? So what was that? That was a really good manipulative play on my part, right? Kind of handle the emotions that she was going through, because I wanted to be loyal to her and connect with her as well, right? So we could go on and on and on just in my life and my conflicts. I mean, hell, just the other day, one of you called me, or not, you didn't call me, you emailed me, right? A student emailed me and said, I feel cheated by this program because I don't have enough time with you. You should be like, we're doing all this work. We're only getting a 1 hour training session. Like, that should be like 3 hours, right? So already initially I'm like, okay, there's a conflict here. And so I read this email and I'm like, well, maybe I should respond to the email. I start writing an email, right? Well, you're wrong here, right here. I'm going to set everything straight. And so I'm thinking about the conflict that I have with this person, right? And then I start getting conflicted about, like, maybe I should call them. Should I call them? I started thinking about, well, how much conflict do I have with this person generally? Well, I mean, we have some spirited discussions, but, I know she knows who I am. I know she knows the real me. She knows the natural me, the high I, high S me, right? She knows this person. Not everybody does. Not every student does, right? But I could tell, this person really gets me. And she appreciates the value that I teach and bring to the table, and on and on. My willingness to give, all that kind of stuff. So like, she really knows who I am. And I probably, normally in a situation where somebody just gives me a complaint and they're just really off base, I'd be like, adapted. They're going to get the mask. They're going to get the front facing public response, and so that low I, low S would not be necessarily the friendliest conversation, right? That would be a conflict, right? That would feel like a conflict, right? But this person, I was like, they know the real me, and I could be myself with them, and that's safe and all that. And so I was like, let's just give her a call. So I call her and we talk about this, and we discuss the conflict between having a 3 hour training session and having a 1 hour training session. and the ups and downs of that and the ways that we can resolve that conflict. And then I find out that this person has been through a really heavy duty like boot camp program in the past that was based on a past career or a present career that where there was training in the past at MIT. And it's like they basically like just abuse these people. And so now she's feeling this conflict about, this is a really tough program. Is it kind of like the last program I was in that was similar to this, where they just put you through hell and then everybody just got shredded and they weren't served. So now she's like conflicted about, do I even want to continue with this program because of the way I felt before? So she had this internal conflict, and now I'm having an external conflict with her. Really wasn't a conflict, but there was a conflict about how do we do this? Like literally a conflict about how should things be set up, and then a conflict between us as well. She has her opinion about how things should be set up, and of course I have mine. I created the program, right? So we have a conflict between two people, and we have a conflict within her that actually is part of what predicated this to some extent, like an emotional conflict, if you will. And then there's a conflict about what to do about all of it. Like not even about the people and everybody's opinion, but the physical manifestation of the way it should be, right? It's a couple conflicts going on, right? So conflict is everywhere, and think of it like this, like people have internal conflicts. Actually, you know what? I'm going to show you this early because we're already talking about it. So I might as well show it to you. All right. So we just made, this is a perfect like illustration of what I just said. So I have this conflict with a student, let's say. And so think of this as like that. Let's say this is the student, this beautiful drawing here. They have a conflict with me, let's say. And so this is you and this is me. I'm an other people, right? And so there's a conflict between two people, right? And you can have that, right? And these are going to be conflicts that we can graph, right? Values conflicts, behavior style conflicts, instinctual conflicts, conflicts cognitively. These are the things that we can measure. I can measure that in me. I can measure that in them. What a conflict might be. So this is like a me-you conflict, right? It's between me and you, mano y mano. And there's going to be a separation or a push-pull that happens there. And at the same time, as I described with this particular student, she also had a conflict within herself. So it's like these two people battling it out within her, within them, right? And so think of that as an internal conflict, a me conflict. It's conflict inside. Now, by the way, one of the things that happens at the beginning of many of our trainings is that we got to get everything scheduled. Everybody's got scheduling conflicts. And so then we have a conflict between you and a group, right? So now, and these are tough. You go to school, you go to work, and you've got this entire Leviathan group, this mass hysteria of people acting and feeling and valuing things a certain way, their own instincts and knee-jerk reactions and conversations. And now you may not agree. You may not have the same feelings or values as the group you're a part of, your church, your community, your neighborhood, your political party, your family, right? I mean, this is everywhere. And so now you've got, a me-them conflict with the group. And those are tough. Those are really tough because you're not going to change that group, chances are. I mean, you might, right? But typically, you're you, the group's the group, and the group is, we talked about this the other day in training, like these groups are, circles. They create a stable structure and they tend not to change, at least from one individual's intervention, unless that's the leader of the group or something. And even then might be tough. If you haven't noticed, especially like you see this in politics all the time, a lot of times our leaders, like I don't want to say they're not leaders, but they're actually driven by the crowd. It's almost like 9 times out of 10, they actually, as opposed to leading this group somewhere, they are much of the time just telling the group what the group already believes and thinks and wants to hear. Now that gives them influence. Obviously, you could paste that reality and then lead them later, right? But half the time, even if I'm the leader of this group, to some extent, I've got to align with these beliefs, values, behaviors, instincts, and thoughts just to get any leadership and influence at all, right? So is the leader really leading the group, or is the group leading the leader? When we talk about history, a lot of times people say, these great leaders of history, Martin Luther King, and the ones that we wouldn't look at so kindly, like Hitler or whatever, like people will many times say, historians will many times say, that leader was created by the group. There was a group dynamic there. Don't just blame the leader, don't just blame Hitler or blame Martin Luther King for that movement. That movement created that leader, right? So who's leading who? Maybe the tail's wagging the dog there. So bottom line is, there's going to be, whether this is a leader of that group or just a part of that group, or even not a part of the group, they're opposing the group, there's going to be conflict between you and groups in your life, right? And then finally, there's the final conflict here, final little breach here. We can see that you've got all these separating aspects and these push-pulls that are happening. You've got a conflict between you and a situation. And so this could be like a place, like, I don't like my office. I don't like the vacation spot we're going to. It's too noisy to work here, right? Can't concentrate. Or it might be, instead of a place, it might be like a thing. Like, I don't like my computer, it's broken, right? You got conflicts with the way something works, right? These aren't even people. So it's like a me-it conflict or a me-that conflict. I don't even know if you can see that. Yeah, you can, okay. So you get what I'm saying? It's like there's conflicts everywhere, and there's different types of conflicts. You got conflict on the inside. You got three kinds of conflict easily, if we categorize it this way, on the outside, other people, groups, and then just situations for that matter. I mean, if you watch, by the way, and conflict is so prevalent in our society, it's such a part of the story of humanity that when you watch a movie or a play, and we see this, what makes a good movie or a good play, one that is that sucks us in, other than what we talked about, like money, violence, sex, power. I mean, those are our favorite subjects as humans. What makes like one that just gets all your attention is the conflict. And in fact, a good actor is one that can bring conflict out in the way that they act in their dialogue or in their activity with other actors, for that matter. This lousy actor, you can't even tell what the conflict is. Can't even tell who's on top, who's on first, who thinks they're in charge. There's all this posturing and whatever's going on there, right? So great movie, lots of internal conflict. In fact, I just the other night, I watched this is one of the more popular Netflix shows right now. What is it called? Startup. It's so funny because literally Bilbo from The Hobbit is one of the leading roles. He's like an FBI agent, so it's just fun to watch Bilbo as an FBI agent. And so he's at the point, spoiler alert, if you're watching this, don't, just like turn the volume down for the next like 20 seconds. He has a love interest who suddenly finds out that he's like embezzling money and he's done something wrong. And so there's this physical conflict that happens between them, and he ends up killing her. So there's this external conflict, but meanwhile, he loves this woman, right? He's fallen in love with her. He totally loves her. And so then he's got this internal conflict about, well, should I kill her? Should I let her live? Should I let her go? If I let her go, I'm going to get in trouble. So he's conflicted between these different values within himself as well. And you could see it in the actor. The actor does this really good job of showing his conflict. He's like, oh, give me a second. He's crying and he's killing this person. And it's like, I mean, that was quite a scene, right? So we know this all exists. And in fact, our art, music, our pop culture, our plays and movies and TV shows, it's like it all has to reflect this. And if it doesn't, we know it's fake. So, but these are the different types of conflict that we're dealing with, and that you as a coach are going to deal with your client, in partnership with your client. You're going to support them in sussing this kind of stuff out. So this think of this, it is a metaphor for it. Imagine that everybody in the world that you coach, everybody that you'll meet, including you, like we're all MPD. We're all multiple personality disorder, right? Like we all have these different people inside of us, right, that are battling it out. I mean, multiple personalities disorders is somebody acts like themselves 1 minute, and then all of a sudden the next minute they're a 10-year-old boy, right? And then the next minute they're a hardened felon, and the next minute they're a mom of 5, and they toss back and forth in these different personalities. I mean, we could literally see this documented if you watch the right documentaries. It's insane to see somebody do this, right? Shift different personalities and traits, over seconds, right? But the fact is, we're all MPD. Just imagine everyone on the street, everyone you'll ever coach to one extent or another has those different personalities within themselves. And then, of course, there's personalities outside themselves that are very different. There are value sets, behavioral styles, instinctual reactions, knee-jerk reactions, just before you even think you're doing it. And thought process and ways of like literally ways of seeing and thinking about the world that are different within your client and without as well. Not to mention that even just the world itself, like, I can't remember the name of the movie, but there's a movie once where this guy is stuck on a ship, or not a ship. It was basically like a boat. It was like a little sailboat, right? And he's sailing around the world, and his ship just gets wrecked. His mast breaks, and he's basically just stuck in the middle of the ocean, and basically just shows his entire process of trying to survive. And he's conflicted with the frickin' boat. So there's even conflict between this person, what they want, what their ideas of life are, and life itself. Even if we erase everyone else and the conflict within you, you're still going to have conflict, right? So this is something that cannot be removed, and it's something you'll even find within your client, even if they have a perfect, serene life with everyone on earth, which never happens, by the way. Even if it looks like it happens, it doesn't. So whether it be conflict within themselves or conflict with other individuals or groups or life situations, your client will need your coaching to get past and deal with or resolve various conflicts so they accomplish their goals and live their life fully. Because these conflicts, I mean, what's the impact of this? We're talking about how does your conflict impact your client? Well, it'll keep them out of action, right? It will have them feel less than alive or take away fulfillment, rob them of their aliveness. It will have them take actions that maybe are dumb actions or bad actions. It will have them be less than influential with other people in their life. It will have relationships get crushed and destroyed. They'll destroy their relationships out of these conflicts a lot of times, or their relationships just will get destroyed, or they will simply, feel trapped in their life. Even if it's not has anything to do with the people in their life, it's like maybe everybody in their life is wonderful and they're wonderful too. But they're gonna feel trapped in their life just because there's conflicts with the rest of life. Like that's the impact here. So we're going to get into the kind of conflicts that you can actually track and measure with the assessments that you have in this program. All right. And if you're not in this program, that's okay. You could get these access to these tools as well. We could license you to actually use these tools. And even if you don't use the tools, think about the concept of this, because sometimes even without the tool, with the right questions and maybe a little bit more time than we would spend, because we've got the tool to accelerate that, you could actually start to see this in your client just by observation or profound questions for that matter. So let's get into this. So here's the first conflict. This is the simplest, most straightforward conflict that you're going to see with your clients, and that's a disc versus disc adapted conflict. So this is when your client has an adaptation. Now, we have an entire training in this program on adaptations. You should have already watched it. So I'm not going to get into the technical aspect of every adaptation, as I did in that training. But the point being that when you make an adaptation in your style, in your behavior, in the way you operate, DISC and behavioral style discusses how we do what we do. Like, am I going to do it energetically? I'm going to do it angrily? Am I going to do it fearfully? Am I going to do it optimistically? Right? Like, are you going to do it with dynamism, or are you going to do it like more kind of, suppressed and down? Like, there's all these different styles that people have. And the thing is that these styles most of the time are instinct driven. Like, these styles show up when you're about 2 or 3, to give you an example. So it's hard to say that these are nurture based or personality based. They're just like people almost like genetically have these. Okay, so that's a crash course in what DISC means. But when we make an adaptation in our style, meaning that that's not really us, we're altering how we do things, we're altering how we act or relate or communicate or how we take action for whatever reason, we alter that, and now we're doing something that's not natural for us. It's an adaptation. It's not instinct for us. It's an adaptation. And so when we make that adaptation, think of it in these different ways. You've got an adaptation. Well, think of your natural as like that's the way you are at home. And then you adapt for maybe when you go to work, right? Go out in public. Or there's the real you versus the act, right? Like, this is just an act. This is not really me. The real me is different. I've adapted. Okay. Or, hey, this is me deep down, and this is my surface like mask, right? This is the surface me when I go out and do my act, and this is me deep down when I show my true self. I'm vulnerable when I'm my natural self. My shields are down, like I'm just open. And this is just the real me. This is just what you see is what you get. Versus I'm guarded. My shields are up. Like, I've changed. I'm adapting because this is what it takes to survive or protect myself or live or succeed, right? Now, some of these may alter based upon the actual adaptation. Like an S adaptation down would be more of a shields down way of operating, but it could be shields up if it's more driven by moving faster as well. So again, that's pedantic. I don't want to get too far down that road, but you get the idea here. Is these are very different worlds. And when this adaptation has radically altered from what's natural, well, then we have a conflict. We have a conflict between who we really are and how we're acting, at least in public, like what we are deep down and what the surface shows. Like there's a conflict there just in an adaptation itself. Okay, so let me give you an example of this. So here's one. Your S, which is your steadiness factor, right? It's how much observable change in emotion you show, or how fast or slow you move, how much of a multitasker, how flexible and agile you are. The lower your S, the faster you are, and the more you kind of show yourself. So think of the low S. Let's say this is my natural. I'm really naturally fast-paced, and I show who I am naturally. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I've adapted up. If I adapt my S up, I'm kind of like a turtle going into its shell, as we like to describe. But now I've gone to not showing who I am, not showing my emotions, to a much slower pace as well, or one or the other or both, right? So that is a conflict. Like, I really naturally want to wear my heart on my sleeve and show you who I am, but I've adapted to not. And I really want to move quickly, but I've slowed down. I'm more routine and steady and persistent. Like, what kind of like emotional conflict might that create in me? So this is something that probably would need to be resolved over time. And again, you can't necessarily be resolved instantly, but I might say to resolve this with a client is, you know what? Maybe you're just agile when you're yourself and you're naturally very agile, but sometimes you just want to relax and you don't have to like give it all out there. You could be a little more reserved and conservative and take it easy and slow down for a change. That could actually be a nice change of pace. Right? And you could adapt to that for whatever reason and be that way at times. And that could actually bring out a really positive thing. Now, does that perfectly resolve the conflict? No, because they really are naturally agile and fast moving and hard on your sleeve and very expressive and all of that. So it's not a perfect resolution. The ultimate resolution of this would be get rid of the adaptation. But if that adaptation changes, I've got to work with them on reframing that and coping with that and resolving that in their life in a way that's positive for them, right? Because what if they run a business where they got to be really reserved and kind of hide their feelings and well, they could be relaxed about that then. Is there a difference between hiding and slowing down and trudging through things in a pedantic way? And there's a difference between that and just being relaxed about it and reserved and easygoing. Of course there is. So that reframe itself could actually make this more palatable for them if they really got to be that way at work or in public or something like that. Let's move over to this one. Here is another adaptation that creates conflict, which is, let's say somebody's naturally high D, which is high dominant, right? Intense, conflict, comfortable with conflict, kind of a go-getter type, bulldog type, right? And they've adapted that down below the energy. This is the energy line, if you guys haven't noticed that, below the line to a really low D. So they've gone from intense to laid back. This is going to be a conflict, right? And by the way, this is an internal conflict, a me conflict. So it's not even conflict they'll have with others. This might cause them to have less conflict with other people. But within themselves, they're like, I'm not even being me. Like, where are my balls? I have no courage. I'm not willing to say what I need to say. I'm acting like somebody I'm not. Like, that's going to be a conflict. Even if they're not aware of it, they might feel that at some level unconsciously, right? So resolving that might look like, well, you know what? You can go after results naturally. That's great. You should embrace that. But, when you lower your D to a more laid back style, you're prioritizing your relationships, because, sometimes, relationships aren't always about getting results constantly and beating everybody up around you. Relationship could just be like being and not having to get a result. So that could be a really positive thing, even before they, move this adaptation back up to where it probably, perfectly should be. Right? So they're, as Robert said a little earlier, compromising. That'll be less of a conflict as a result of that coaching. So any questions about this, let me know. We're going to cover quite a few more of these, and we're going to go, I don't want to say it's more complex, but we're going to go deeper into other profiling tools and conflicts that they have between themselves, because so far all we've covered is conflicts that happen within a behavioral profile, like within an instinctual kind of behavioral style 4-quadrant disc, right? And so we're going to do one more of these that's not adaptation based, but actually just based in conflicting styles as well. And then we're going to get into other profiles and how these profiles conflict with one another as well. All right, so let's cover this one. This is different in that this is not an adaptation. This is two aspects of somebody's behavior that conflict with one another, right? So now we haven't adapted the I down or the C up, but we just have a high I and have a high C, right? This is the energy line again. So if you have a high I, high C, this is a me conflict. These are conflicting instincts and styles. I have an instinct that says optimism, everything will be wonderful. I have an instinct that says fear, watch out, be careful. Right? Those two inflicts are at those two, what I said, inflicts. That's inflict is the combination of instinct and conflict. Inflict. So you have an inflict. That's a new word. You could write that one down. Sorry. There is a conflict between these two instincts. There is an instinctual conflict, right? I have two conflicting instincts. I think I got that right. Right? So I've got this, it's I'm pulled in different directions, instinctually speaking, right? So point of the matter being that I've got optimism on one end, fear on the other end, and they're pulling between each other. And so I want to resolve this. So maybe the resolution is, hey, look, enjoy your preparation, because you're going to have to prepare, because that's the message of fear, is get ready, prepare, make sure that, you're not going to have a problem. But, you got to also enjoy yourself. You got to have fun because you're high I. So enjoy your preparation. How could you do that? You could actually have your cake and eat it too. That resolves the conflict, at least in that respect. What about trust but verify, right? Because this is a but, right? Like this is literally a but here, because I'm super trusting, but I want to be careful and I'm fearful to some extent of what could happen if I do trust too much. So trust but verify. I mean, that phrase in a way can be a resolution of the conflict, because it's like, hey, I can do both. I could trust this person while I verify. And I hate to even say, but it's like trust while you verify. I'm going to do my due diligence. I trust you. I just got to do my due diligence. I got to verify too, right? I could do these two things. I could be an I and I could be a C simultaneously in that case, in that relational case, right? So those are some possible resolutions. The resolution to a Mimi conflict within a disc is not to change somebody's disc. That doesn't happen. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but don't do that. That's not going to be a great thing. I wouldn't expect that you have the capability to do that. I suppose some coaches do. I'm not interested in that. Try to change who somebody really is deep down. Because we're literally talking about a natural style. You can have both of these. Plenty of people have I's and C. I have an I and a C. So I got to trust but verify. I just started working with some real estate transactions or real estate investments, and we're trying to get more cash to do more of them. And so I'm tapping into my IRA because IRA returns are generally at best, 7 to 10%, because it's typically stock market type of stuff, and that's the average return. It's like, well, I can double those returns with real estate. So how do I do that? I'm talking to a guy who's actually going to get me a way to do that in a self-directed IRA. And I'm very optimistic and I trust him and I'm very friendly. And I've had 3 meetings with him so far. And then I said at the last meeting, he's like, hey, you ready to do this? Like, sign the paperwork. Like, let's have a meeting. And he wants to really get the thing to move forward. He's a good salesperson, right? And I said, you know what? Let's not have a meeting next week. I got to do my due diligence. And I was very friendly in it. And it wasn't totally serving the eye. If I was totally serving the eye as being this guy's best friend, I would just be like, yes, whatever you want, right? But I trusted but verified. And I got to enjoy my preparation. I'll do this optimistically with a great energy. But I can't serve both of those masters fully at once, but I can still serve each of them, right? And I can be friendly and optimistic and trusting, and I can also be prepared and verifying and detailed and conscientious. Make sense? Right? So it's just an example of that. I'm not trying to give examples of every one of these, but that's a Mimi conflict within the disc. Let's move over to values now. All right. So here's a value versus value conflict. Now, value conflicts are the classic conflict that you see within people and between people as well. Like somebody will say, this person only cares about themselves, and I care about everyone but myself, right? As if that's so much better than just caring about yourself, right? And so those two people will have an emotional conflict, right? Because values are emotional drives, right? So we call this conflicting emotions, conflicting values, or conflicting beliefs as well, because beliefs drive emotion, right? So we have these inner ideas and ideals and philosophies, and okay, they drive how we feel about stuff too, right? So we can have conflicts with other people, political conflicts, family conflicts, intimate conflicts, right? These conflicts many times, if not almost all the time. I mean, I remember Tony Robbins used to tell me every conflict is a values conflict, right? Now, I think the way we can actually slice and dice it can take it past that, I think, oversimplification. Tony was always good at simplifying to some extent. I mean, he was a complex guy as well, very theoretically driven, just like myself. But anyway, coming back to this, values can be conflicted within yourself. Now, I'm not going to get into values conflicts on the outside, but let's at least cover Mimi conflicts inside values. So here's one example. This is the classic conflict that I see that's very common, which is economic versus altruist. This is get versus give. I want my stuff. I want mine. Yeah, I want to get mine, but I also want to give, right? These two things, seemingly at least, conflict with one another, right? So how do you handle that? How do you resolve that? Well, a lot of ways to resolve it. I'll share a couple more from what I have written here. One of the ways I have resolved this for clients or supported clients in resolving this in the past is, hey, find a life that allows you to do both, right? Can you get and give at the same time? Is that possible? Well, sure. A lot of businesses that's possible. There's a lot of social entrepreneurship opportunities out there. There's not-for-profits. There's all sorts of ways to get and give. Now, a lot of times people will be unbalanced in this, like they'll go overboard on the getting, and it actually takes something from their ability to give, or they'll give so much of themselves that they lose what they would have gotten, what they really need for themselves, right? So then they got to balance that piece. Life can be balanced, but you cannot a lot of times. A lot of times you're going to be unbalanced and conflicted within yourself. So you got to resolve those externally, right? So find a vehicle that gives both, and then find ways to balance your activity, right? So that's one of the ways that I'll coach somebody in this me conflict. Another one is, as it says here, live for both. Like, you have a life that allows you to get and give, but pick your moments. Pick moments where you'll give and moments where you'll get. You can have fundraisers where you'll give. You can have family time where you'll give. You can have relational time where you'll give. You can have time where you'll give money, in a charitable type of situation. You can have time where you can give spiritually or emotionally to people, where you really coach them and support them, or just listen and be a friend, be a family member, just love them, even when they're not loving you back. Those are really altruistic paradigms that you can pick your battle and pick your moment, where those might be times where maybe, hey, this is time to give. This isn't time to get from me. And then there's times to go make money and get rich and have a selfish moment where you watch a TV program you want to watch. You have me time, and you have a spa day, and you could go on and on and on. You have your loved ones give you a massage, and you have birthdays and Mother's and Father's Day. I mean, anyway, you get the idea, right? There's these moments where you get to get. Now, sometimes people will say, well, out of 10 days, I'm going to have, 9 out of 10 of them be give and 1 out of 10 of them be get, right? And you wonder why, like, there's a little resentment that this person is going to have, right? I literally have family members that they have resentments within themselves. They'll probably never resolve them, probably die with those resentments intact. Why? Because they gave 9 out of 10 days out of their life, and they got 1 out of 10. And they're still living this out, And so it's like, yeah, like that's going to be a recipe for resentment, because they never got. And so one way to get is to resent it and be angry, and then they'll get some energy back for themselves. Or maybe somebody will figure out they're so angry and upset, and then they'll be able to get and start to balance this out. So you will find ways. Here's the point. If you don't balance your conflicts, at least externally, again, I don't mean emotionally you're going to resolve this, right? Because it may never resolve emotionally, right? You may still have a push-pull within you on this one. That's just, hey, that's part of life. Like, sometimes a little bit of suffering that people go through in life, right? Or at least some pain temporarily in moments, right? That's predictable. Suffering's optional maybe. But, that's an argument. That's a philosophical argument for another time. But the point of the matter is that someone may not ever resolve this internally, but externally, they can find ways to be selfish, even though they're not like feeling like that's altruistic. So they get enough for themselves. If they don't, like I just explained, they'll resolve it with resentment. They'll resolve it with some kind of secondary gain, weird kind of psycho issue within themselves. And then we wonder why this person's always upset, or why they're always, I don't know, depressed or something. It's like, yeah, you're depressed because look at what you're up to. You resolve this stuff, the depression goes away. You can get off the depression drug. Don't take my medical advice. Of course, I'm not a doctor. Ask your doctor always. But the point being that this needs to be worked out. You need to be able to somehow balance this in a way that you decide cognitively works, and that will support these emotions in you. If you feel like one of these emotions is shortchanged or not served, it's going to be an ongoing problem. It's going to be a conflict, and that conflict is going to come out. You can't just hide that. You're either going to feel it inside, or you're going to act out some block, some issue, some perpetration, and you're wondering why. This is why. So that's a values conflict. 2 different values that conflict with each other. You can literally have things that you value, and they conflict with another important thing to you, another value for you. Okay, let's get to the next one. Now we're going a lot deeper here. So here's two different aspects of somebody's life that conflict with each other. So we have now disc versus value conflict. You can actually have correlations between disc and values, between your instincts and your emotions, but you can also have conflicts. So this is an instinct that conflicts with an emotion. Like instinctually, you want to do X, but emotionally, like your feelings tell you something different. By the way, when we talk about this in attributes, we know your instincts are like that systematic part of you, that lizard brain, and your emotions are more of the mammalian brain, the puppy dog brain that just feels stuff. Those two brains don't always talk to each other very well, and they can disagree. You can have an instinct that says kill, and the emotion will say save, right? Or the instinct says run, and the emotion says don't do anything, right? Or attack. So these things can be conflicted, and somebody could be like scared and angry at the same time, or happy and worried at the same time, right? So so instinct versus emotion, or instinct versus beliefs, because you can believe something that contradicts an instinct. Hey, my instinct is to eat the ice cream, but my belief is ice cream is bad. Ice cream is the devil, right? So, all right. So anyway, here's one potential conflict between a value and a behavior. So we have individualistic, let's say that's high. So that's the freedom value, versus compliance being high, your C being high in your disc, which is a control. It's not a value, but it's a control mechanism. It's like you're more controlled. So how can you be like instinctually like hyper controlling, right? Like very detailed and concerned about everything and make sure all the ducks are in the row, and yet all about freedom, like believe and feel that freedom is number one in your life at the same time. You can, right? And I actually coach some people like this that are like, they're totally controlling, but totally like just want what they want when they want it, and like spontaneous at the same time. Talking about conflict, I'm being all spontaneous, but then my control factor gets scared. Or I'm being in control of everything and everything's predictable, and yet I feel a lack of freedom and I'm unhappy or unfulfilled. Can you imagine that conflict within somebody? That's an internal conflict, a me conflict. Just, it's a instinct or a behavioral style, the way somebody naturally does something, even if they don't value that, with what they actually value most highly, at least in their career, if not in their life. So how can you resolve the freedom versus control conflict? Well, there's a couple resolutions I've written in here. Try this. Defy your instinct. Sometimes you just got to go against instinct. Okay, yeah, I know I want all the ducks in a row, but you know what? I'm just not going to do it today. I've resolved I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to necessarily like it, but I can gain freedom as a result of that. I can be free from my instinctual drives. You can do that. It's going to be a temporary thing because you'll probably snap back to a much more high C behavioral style, because especially if this is your natural style, at some point you'll revert to that. By the way, couldn't you get your life to a point where it's so predictable that you have more freedom to do more variety of things? You're just going to have to have a really predictable, safe, and stable life, so then you can go on vacation, or you can, just fool around and do whatever you want, right? And you'll feel like you have that freedom because you've complied with all your boxes that you've set up for yourself, right? Here's another one. Resolve that you have the freedom to be yourself. Like, what if you are controlling? What if you are really compliant and rules driven and everything? Well, could you just be free to be that way? You just let yourself be, and then be free to be that. And that takes some freedom as well, especially if there's this nagging part of you that says, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. Right? So that is an example of a disc versus values conflict. Those are some resolutions that you might offer in the coaching side of it. Let's move on. Now we're going super deep. First time ever in this training, I think, that we're talking about attributes. It's a very, very advanced and sophisticated instrument where we really get into how you think, like all the different brains inside your brain, right? And how they conflict with each other, and how they kind of cognate, and how clear they are, and what their biases are. Again, well, that's a conversation for another day to some extent, but how might somebody's behavioral style, their instinct, conflict with their, what we call attributes, basically their thought processes? So this is instinct versus thought. or style versus thought. So I have an instinct that pulls me in a direction, and then I have how I think on top of that, how I've learned to think over time in school or outside of school with just my own thoughts. And cognitively, I have this huge cerebral cortex that is not instinct driven, right? Instinct doesn't run my logic center. My logic center runs my logic center. Now, it may not run my body and my decisions completely. I can logically know it's wrong to eat the ice cream, but I'm eating it. It's wrong to binge on this particular drug or alcohol, but I'm going to do it anyway, right? So logically, I know better, but my logic might not be in control of me, but my logic is still in control of my logic, right? Generally speaking. Now, sometimes that's not fair to say completely. I mean, sometimes instinct might drive a certain level of thought, right? Or at least the logic will be observing the instinct. Like I'm seeing myself eat the ice cream and I know that's probably not a good idea, right? So there's like this logical observer that's happening, right? So these two different, there's like, you got two different people inside you, right? You got this lizard that's just like running around trying to survive, the instinct part of you. And then you've got this, great ape, you've got this high level, Eckhart Tolle type of, kind of godlike being, this demigod that's like can see everything and can do higher math, right? Watching the lizard do what the lizard does, because you're like, I'm that lizard because I'm acting that way, but I'm not totally because I can see what the lizard is doing. That's kind of weird. All right, let's get back to the point here. So instinct versus thought, or style versus thought, that's disc versus attributes index. So let's say we have somebody who's very low I, low influence on the disc. So their instinct is going to be hyper realistic, low optimism factor, not people oriented, but their empathy is super high, and maybe they even got a positive bias. I'm just saying that's a maybe. It doesn't even have to be, but they're of really high empathy. So can you imagine being someone who you're not people oriented, like you don't even like people necessarily, right? You like to stay away from them, you like to be alone, but you have tremendous empathy for them. And you understand how they feel. You're like have the psychic connection with them, right? So you're not a connector versus you understand everybody's feelings perfectly. You're a psychic you're like a recluse psychic, right? I think there was a couple of movies where they had this person who can feel everyone, and they feel everything so much that they have to stay in this room guarded and away from society because it's just too much for them. Well, that's like a low I. They don't really like people. They do understand them, right? A lot of low I's don't really understand people that well. They don't really want to, but if your empathy's high with that positive bias, you actually do. And you actually really do care about how those feelings play out as well. So how might you resolve that? Well, maybe somebody could connect to the logic. And let's say I'm coaching you. I would say, okay, Mr. Client, connect to the logic of what that person is feeling at a distance. You can stay at a distance between you and that person and still connect to logically how they're feeling without having to feel it and go through that necessarily. Or you could feel it, but feel it at a distance, right? But you're going to have a little bit of a distance between you and that person naturally as a low I as well. Now, I can also try to help them resolve that, but that's going to be a limited resolution because they're not somebody who's 100 I. They're just never going to be, right? They're a turtle, not a lizard, right? You don't change the species of instinct, instantaneously or even over time. That's probably not an ecological thing. So let them be who they are and resolve how this conflict might work out for them in their life. All right. I think this is our final group because we're going super deep now, really down the rabbit hole here. Now let's talk about values versus attributes. So somebody has a value that conflicts with one of their attributes. So it's an emotion versus thought. So I feel one thing, but I think another. Cognitively, I know something or experience something or think something different than what I'm feeling I'm driven towards, what I value and think is like feel is important, if you will. Another way of saying this is belief system. Belief, I just call it BS for short. Belief versus thought. Like I believe this, but I think differently than what I believe. Make sense? These can be conflicts. So I'll give you one example. An economic value being really low versus somebody's practical thinking, which is that second from the left bar practical thinking, external, it's extrinsic, external dimension being very, very high. So somebody thinks practically, maybe they even, again, have a positive bias, like they have a bias for the practicalities of life, but their economics are really low. Can you imagine being really hyper practical? Like you make everything work around you, but you like hate money, right? Or you're really not into return on investment in business and all these kind of like practical considerations that we have like created in modern society, but we're still pretty practical. Somebody, by the way, might be practical, but low economic because let's say they're in academia or they're in a very liberal aspect of society that like looks down at economics to some extent. I'm not to judge, but like that's a tendency that happens in a the more left leaning political views, right? So if I live in like San Francisco and everybody's like, hey, we all give to the poor and we overpay on our taxes and we don't want to be too rich. It might be practical for me to actually be a part of that and be supported by that environment rather than the economics of it. Or again, in an academic environment, it's like I could actually have a really great life without necessarily having tremendous amounts of money because that, or the church or even politics, right? There are aspects of society, there are societal constructs that we have, communal constructs that actually kind of divorce themselves from economics to a greater or lesser extent, but still have great practical benefits. Like I gotta be a politician. I don't have to make a lot of money, but I have all this power and I have a great place to live, right? Because like my power actually gives me access to things and people and places that I don't need the money for because I have it via my power. Or again, like if I'm with the church, I be very, very practical about how the church mechanics work. And let's say I don't have any money, but I live off the church, right? I live off what people give to the church and I could live in the church or live as a part of the church or sponsored by the church, right? It's the old story, speaking of religion, is like Jesus would travel around and he had no money, no possessions. He's like, give everything away. But like he always had, food to eat and, he would go to somebody else's house and they would give him and he would trade with them as a Messiah, right? And give to them. So there was a different economics going on there, right? And he was supported in certain ways, obviously supported by his followers, supported by people who cared about him, who got something from him, etc., without economics there, right? So you could still actually be quite practical without these, but there is a conflict here because they have disinterest in money, but they understand how it works. I know money, but I don't like it, right? That's the feeling. I have a feeling against that, but I understand it. And I value the practicalities that it could provide, but I don't like it in and of itself. I don't like the ROI game. I don't like the business game, something like that. There's a feeling of that repulses me. I value against that. I move away from that as value. Can you do that, by the way, even with something that should be so universally appreciated and valued? Absolutely can. If economic is low enough, you actually have an aversion to it. There's a very good chance of that. It's not guaranteed, but there's a very good chance. I know people that have this aversion. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. And there could be all sorts of like stupid reasons why that person has the aversion. Like there might be pathology behind that. That's possible. But let's not judge. Let's just say, hey, it is what it is right now. We can resolve that by moving economics up, changing some of these values, but they may not decide to do that. That may not be what they're after. Okay, so what's a resolution here? So we could say to this client, hey, you know what? Use your ability in dealing with money, because you're so practical and you're so good at this, to free yourself from focusing on it. You could actually divorce yourself from money once you resolve it. Like one of the conditions of mastery, or not a condition, but think of it like one of the signs of mastery, as you're free from a particular domain. Like if I'm a master coach, I'm free from the constraints that the domain of coaching, the box of coaching, I live outside of it, right, in a way. So I'm not constrained by coaching anymore. Again, Michael Jordan, I always use him as a as an example of mastery. Michael Jordan is a master of basketball. He was not constrained by basketball. Like there's physical limitations in the world of basketball. You can only get that ball to go in the hoop so many times and get the ball down the court so many times and pass the ball in a certain way. Well, Michael Jordan was not constrained by those things. Like he transformed or I'm sure there's a trans word that I should be using here, but he bypassed the game. He got beyond the game, right? And as a result, you saw the mastery reflected in that. So he wasn't like, again, you master economics, you're not constrained. You don't have to deal with it. Like I remember a story that Tony Robbins told a long time ago, and forget about the story. The story doesn't even matter, but part of the story was he was walking around and somebody like his car conked out or something, and he needed to pay for something, and he was at a store and he needed to pay for it, and they were like, okay, this is how much it is, and he's like, I'm sorry, I'm rich, I don't carry money. Right? Like he's just like, you see what I mean? It's just like he mastered economics, and so now all of a sudden he's free from it in a way. Obviously in that situation he wasn't, because it ended up being a bit of a limitation for him. He resolved it with good practical thinking, I'm sure. So could you master money to free yourself from focusing on it? Absolutely you could. A lot of people that master money, they don't love money. I'll give you an example, another example of this. Like Steve Jobs, famous for talking about how disinterested in money he is. He's like, I don't even care about the money thing. I just wanted to make a dent in the universe. I just wanted to make a difference. I just wanted to invent something. I wanted to like make a difference. I wanted to cause an impact here in a really big way. Now, money is required for that, right? But he wasn't interested in the money. He had ups and downs according to that too, right? But besides that, he made an impact and the money followed. And so he did master money in his own way. Like he's not an accountant, or he wasn't an accountant. He wasn't a financier, but he was really good at influencing people. He was really good at getting the money from people by marketing and good salesmanship and good design, right? He found all sorts of ways to make the economics work that were not solely based in economics. They weren't just for the love of money itself, while he also was not that into that. So he mastered economics in his own way and was free from focusing on it as well. Does that mean money didn't exist for him? Does that mean that he didn't have to deal with money at times? No, he had to still deal with money. I mean, there were still financial considerations for Apple and Next and Pixar and whatever. But like he used that as a tool when it was needed, and was freed up by it as a good practical thinker as well. So you master something, you are no longer constrained by it. So Robert says money is a scorecard for success. It is a scorecard, right? It's one of the easier scorecards. So if you become successful in any area at the highest level, there's a good chance money follows that. It doesn't always, but it can for sure. There's a good chance that it will. And the bottom line isn't the only line. It's a great way to think about it. I love it. So anyway, that's one possible resolution for low economic versus high practical thinking. Finally, let's get into this final conflict. This is a conflict that happens within the attributes index itself. So it's not attributes versus values or versus dis. This is attributes versus another aspect of attributes called bias. And as you know, or you may know this or not, but the attributes measure, number one, somebody's clarity level through the height of the bar, but it also measures their bias for or against that area of thought, that dimension of thinking, that part of the mind, right? So attribute versus bias would be, think of it like ability versus preference. Like I have this ability, but I prefer against it, or I don't have this ability, but I prefer to do it anyway. You know, like I'm lousy at volleyball, but I love volleyball, or I'm really, really great at math, but I hate math, right? So it's ability versus preference. So let's cover one of these. It's just one example. There's many of these. So here is the sense of self. This is the intrinsic internal dimension, right? So as you're thinking inside yourself, your empathy for yourself, your sense of self, your ability to understand and appreciate your own emotions and how much you care about that within you, your own emotions. So we used to call this self-esteem, but people got mad, so we just changed it to sense of self. But think of it like it really is kind of self-esteem. It's like if I don't care about my feelings, I have lower self-esteem. If I understand myself and my feelings and I really appreciate that, then I have higher self-esteem, right? So bottom line is look at your sense of self. If it's really low, the sense of self is lower. You don't really have as much of a sense of your own feelings. If it's a negative bias, then you either don't feel good within yourself or you don't really care about your feelings, right? Whether your sense of self is high or not. But let's assume you have a high sense of self. It's like it's an 8, let's say, which is really high for sense of self, or 9 or 10 is almost unheard of. But you have a negative bias, a really negative bias. The tachometer, the little gauge at the bottom, goes all the way over to the left. That's hyper negative. So what this tells us is that you understand your feelings, but you don't care about those. So you have a conflict. When it comes to your feelings, you're conflicted. You're conflicted between your understanding and your mastery of your own feelings and how much you've decided they matter, like how much you even focus on that. Now that could be for a variety of reasons, as we sometimes will talk about in assessment immersion training. We talk about why that might be. Number one, it might be because you literally just don't care about your feelings that much. You don't value them tremendously. Or it also could be you don't feel good within yourself very often. And so you don't like to focus on that, not because you don't care about your feelings, but because your feelings aren't really that good right now. So they're not the most positive feelings. Anyway, regardless of why, this is the bottom line. This is one description of this conflict between your ability to understand this, your clarity, and your bias. You understand, but you don't care. You understand how you feel, but you don't care how you feel. So how might you resolve that? Well, here's a couple of resolutions. If I was coaching you, I'd say, look, let's see if we can work on you feeling better. If you feel lousy and that's why you don't care how you feel, you know how people say like something's really lousy and they're like, I don't care about that anyway, right? It's like, no, you care. Just lying to yourself that you're saying you don't care so you don't have to face it. Like, let's actually face how you feel and actually have you feel better. That's one resolution. Another resolution is, hey, maybe whether you care or not, you need to prioritize that self-care because it's part of your life. It's part of what you have. It gives you the ability to give to others, even if you don't care how you feel. Others, it's going to change how others feel about whatever, about you, about the relationship with you, about you as a role model. It's all sorts of issues that could come out just from not caring for yourself, even if you don't really care for yourself. I mean, I think I have a negative bias, but I prioritize my self-care because I know it's the right thing to do as a role model, as a coach, as a leader, as a family man. And I also know, like, if I don't care for myself, I'll eventually die as well. And that is really a problem for all the things I really do care about, because life denotes like whether or not you can do anything. Everything from life comes from being alive, basically, until you have something that lives beyond you. And hopefully that's part of, what we can appreciate too. But that's only one aspect versus all the other aspects of life that actually transmitted through living, right? So if you don't prioritize living your feelings or taking care of you and feeling good about that, it's like, problems, right? So just prioritize that, whether or not you want to, whether or not you care to think about it. Like, I don't care to think about working out, but I do it, right? I find a way to fit it in. It's like, I have to make it a priority, right? So that, I think, believe it or not, that actually is it. Congratulations, you made it through all the examples of, these are all me conflicts. We haven't even gotten to conflict between you and another individual, right? Can you imagine and by the way, just a short preview to that, can you imagine any of these conflicts that we just talked about? Behavioral and instinct conflict, adaptation conflicts, how somebody thinks they should act in public versus privately, value versus value conflicts, like different values conflicting with each other, values versus behaviors conflicts, or instinct versus belief conflicts, let's say, or emotion conflicts. And then finally, again, attribute conflicts, like values versus attributes, attributes versus biases, and then also instinct versus attributes as well, like how I think versus my instinct, how I think versus my feelings, how I think versus my biases for that thinking. Can you imagine all those different conflicts happening between you and someone else, even if you didn't have any conflicts yourself? What if you had one value and somebody you work with has another that conflicts with your value? What if you had an instinct and they have an instinctual way of communicating or operating that conflicts with yours? Same things that we just talked about, right? But it's on the outside now. Can you imagine what that would bring out in a business, in a family, in the emotions within those people, the relating and the relationships that happen, the actual external, physical, tangible conflicts that can happen, whether they're financial or actual, like coming to blows or arguing and yelling or like arguments on social media? Can you imagine that? You don't have to imagine it because you're experiencing it every day. You're seeing it on Facebook. You're seeing it in comments on YouTube. You're seeing it on Instagram. You're seeing it in the media. You're seeing it all the time. You're seeing it at work. You're seeing it in your family. You're seeing it. You're experiencing, whether it's personally, like because you're hanging out with people, or even if you're, like a recluse, you probably see it on TV, if nothing else. So everything I just described applies as well between you and them, or you and me and you, so to speak. And resolving these things within yourself is one thing, but resolving them on the outside to negotiate, placate, support, give and take, like, you're never going to run out of stuff to deal with on that for yourself, much less your clients. Not to mention client conflicts between you and a client that can come up. I mean, there are more typical ones, obviously, we could talk about within the business. I mean, coaching a client to do something they didn't want to do, or they wouldn't naturally do, or they haven't been doing and they've been putting off, or they've been resisting doing, or talking about something that they ought to be honest about, they don't like that. There's your conflict right there, even if you're not dealing with the rest of their conflicts and they don't bring them up. So there's plenty more where that came from, as far as work and workshopping, seeing this in your clients' graphs within themselves, helping them with that, and then helping them with the next circle, them and others, right? And the next circle, them and their entire community and the world and the universe. It's like, yeah, 10 years of coaching, nothing. I mean, you got the rest. I mean, you'd be working with them the rest of their life if you can look at these, identify them, and actually start to resolve them as well. So we just talked about potential resolutions of the internal conflicts. Now you got to work on the external ones. We don't have examples for that, but again, it exists. The point I wanted to make here before we wrap is that it does exist. It is a phenomenon, and you will be working with clients on that till kingdom come. And then we gotta get, how are you going to work with that? Are you going to bring those others in? Are you going to do a group wheel and group values and actually mitigate that way? I mean, that's one way to do it. Sometimes you're just going to be working with somebody that's dealing with a conflict with an individual, though. So that's soon to be discussed. Yeah, okay. So Robert said I had a conflict in a coaching call. Could have used this a few days ago. What's interesting, Robert, is that what I find is that when I get and feel and experience conflicts within coaching sessions themselves, like between me and a client, or just within the session, whether I feel like I'm a part of that conflict or not, because sometimes I feel divorced from it maybe a little bit, is that when I can bring the conflict up, like identify this stuff, I'm like, hey, it looks like the conflict that you're talking about here is between this value and that value, or whether we could do this or that, or you think this and I think that. Does that make sense? Can you see that conflict there and bring it out? Then that conflict stops having such an impact. One of the big distinctions in coaching that I've learned and I've found is very helpful between clients and myself and clients in their world is what is invisible to you or your client has an impact. So if there's a conflict that they don't see, or they can feel it, but they don't know what it is, it's like it has an impact. It's almost like it puts a ceiling on that coaching relationship at that point. Hey, you know what? It's really hard to talk to you because you keep acting like I'm beating you up, and I'm not. I'm here. I'm on your side, right? It's like if that's going on, it hasn't been spoken to. It's like an unspoken thing. Well, then your coaching call is going to be limited by that. if it's unspoken between a client and the world or the universe or their communities or their loved ones or whatever, their relationships with those entities, with those phenomenon is also going to get constrained. But the point of the matter is, if I can actually bring it up, Robert, in a coaching session, like, hey, look, here's the conflict. This is what you're dealing with. This is what I'm dealing with right here. Like, we're literally, this coaching session is an expression of that conflict between these two things, not between us necessarily, but between things that we can identify that are traits that we exemplify at times. But that's not, this trait, this conflict is not us. It's separate from us. We are not our conflict. So as soon as I can identify that, bring it out, suddenly what's visible, right? Like what's invisible has total impact on us and constrains us and limits our lives, limits our coaching. What's visible to us now, and because we've, looked at the geometry of this conflict, doesn't have an impact. As soon as you bring it up, you bring up that conflict, watch it just disappear. I mean, it doesn't really disappear, but the impact disappears. It's almost like, well, no, I don't have that conflict anymore. Or like, hey, we have the conflict, but we can get beyond it. Just the other day, I'll give you one example really quick. A client, the client didn't follow through, just blew off all her commitments. And I said, Wendy, what's going on here? Like, you can't even get you to do this simple thing. So it's like, look what's going to happen to your life. If you don't do this, we were talking about financially. You don't do this financially, it's like you're SOL. It's like, how are you you're going to be homeless, in 20 years. Like we were talking about retirement and all this kind of stuff. I was like, you can't even get you to do this. Like, we can't do that. It's like you certainly can't talk to you about it. I was really in her face about it. And she said from that, he's like, well, she responded to me. She's like, you're really beating me up here. You're really beating me up. She used that very physical kind of metaphor. I mean, it was literally, I just on the phone, I was not beating her up, but I got what she meant by that. I said, look, Wendy, like you say I'm beating you up, but let me tell you something. I think that I know I'm maybe being a little harsh here, but I know I'm on your side, and that's why I can talk to you like this, because this is not okay for you not to have this done. It's not okay for you not to see these results in your life. For you, forget about me. I'm like, what difference does it make for me? I've got my own life to go back to. And as soon as I said that, I was still pretty intense with her. She like there was no issue. It's like it just went away, right? And so we went from this wounded client who was like abused by her coach to this client who was like pulled herself up by her bootstraps and got in the zone. And guess what? The same day she did her assignments, she followed through. So conflict, here's a takeaway that like I really think I've done a disservice in this conversation to not bring this up in the original, but conflict is not good or bad. It's just conflict. These things we talked about how they impact and how they can get resolved, but these conflicts bring richness to life. Like I said, you won't watch a movie without conflict. You won't pay attention to the news unless there's conflict. Like we know that scientifically, you and I won't. And it's not just because we know, well, life is conflict and it sucks, but we just have to deal with it. No, we actually are attracted to conflict because conflict itself brings out the richness of the experience of life that without it, we would hate our lives. I remember there was a show, I binged on it a long time ago called The Good Place. It was like these people go to like heaven, but they're not supposed to be in heaven and all this kind of stuff happens. And they went to the real heaven and everybody hated their experience of the real heaven because everything was given to them. There was no conflict. It was just like everything was like perfection. And people got fat and they lost their mind. They weren't sharp anymore. They were kind of like just retarded by this ease of the afterlife, right? And this philosophical idea got played out in the show. And I thought what was interesting about it is that isn't that true about life? It's like without conflict, what are we? Without these intricacies and these challenges, like why bother being alive anyway? You get bored and tired of it, and eventually there is no purpose. Purpose and conflict are they're like part of one another. They're kissing cousins. Purpose is not about just being all blissful and everything. Purpose has shit to deal with, okay? So as my old mentor, Tony Robbins, said once in a coaching session that I observed him running, where this person that he was coaching was extremely conflicted, and they were conflicted between them and their family. There's all this conflict they were dealing with. And Tony said very beautifully, and it was a great trance that he put her in, he said, have you ever been to the ocean and you've seen the waves and the beauty of the waves and the way the wind and the water interact? And this woman says, yeah, I've seen it. And Tony said, that's conflict. Without the conflict between the wind and the water, between the tides and the ocean, between the shore and the beach and the water, the beach and the ocean, those beautiful waves would never have formed. They could never have formed. It would just be it would be dead. The ups and the downs of the roller coaster of life are the fun part. It's the part that we live for. Without conflict, you're a flat line. It's like you're dead. You're dead inside or dead on the outside. So he said, there's beauty in that conflict if you can appreciate that. There's an eye in every hurricane that we can be peaceful while all shit's hitting the fan around us. And so as she started to embrace her conflict in her life, or her conflict with her clients' lives, or her conflict with the people around them, and appreciate that that's not to complain about and think that we only have to resolve them, or we only have to fix them and get past them and make it so everything is perfectly aligned. She started to see the beauty in the conflict all around her and within her. And she started to embrace that. And then she started to master it, because then she wasn't constrained by it. She could get beyond it, but also appreciate that it exists. And this is not something to kill or win against, something to master within herself, within her relationships, and also something you as a coach, coming back to beyond her, can master and support your client in mastering as well, whether you resolve it or not. So, as Robert says, lack of conflict creating new conflict because nature abhors a vacuum. Never not a conflict, right? Perfect way to transition us to actions, speaking of actions. So, if you got any questions about this, let me know. But here's my assignment for you. Here is the final word on this. I'm going to ask you to do your mission, if you choose to accept it, is, first of all, as we've said with every single live stream so far, look at your clients' graphs. Look at the graphs. Look at the scores. Look at their scores. And once you've done that, step 2, ask yourself, what are the conflicts? What are the conflicts within the disc? What are the conflicts within the values? What are the conflicts within the attributes? What are the conflicts between disc and values? What are the conflicts between disc and attributes? What are the conflicts between values and attributes as well? And then what about the disc conflicts are adaptations versus just, flat out behavioral conflicts, like two styles that are conflicting styles. And then also attributes wise, you got any conflicts between the attribute and the bias as well. Notice the conflicts and just, write them down. There's a conflict here. There's a conflict here. Just make a little spreadsheet about it. Just list all the conflicts, brainstorm it. And finally, step 3, ask yourself, and you might ask your client this as you identify these for your client, how do those conflicts manifest? How do those conflicts show up in your life, in your business, in your finances, in your body, in your work that you're doing, in your career, in your time management, in your social life, in your relationships, in your intimate relationships, in your family? How do those conflicts manifest? Just the internal conflicts alone. And then you can start identifying, hey, anything that in particular about you that conflicts with your wife or husband, or conflicts with your family, or conflicts with your boss, values, behaviors, attributes, ways of thinking. That's your assignment. Go to it. And my final request, or my appeal to you today, is that there are leaders, coaches, and really just flat out people that have plenty of conflicts in their life that are invisible to them, even though they're always dealing with the angst of or the impact of those conflicts. And they haven't embraced them, they haven't accepted them, they haven't resolved them. They haven't done anything with them because they don't even see it clearly, because they don't see what you see now. And my request for you is, first of all, share this with them so they can see that. Give them this gift. And then if you want to be their coach and coach them on it, great. You have my permission to do so. And you go with my blessing. And also, by the way, one way that this will get out to people that normally wouldn't see it is if you just like the video, whether it's Facebook or YouTube, people will see this that are like you, and that the algorithm just knows are like you, and they'll get these conflicts resolved. They'll support the world in this, and they'll get things resolved that never would get resolved. They'll handle conflicts in their life that never would have gotten handled. And I think that this vehicle, if there's anything really great about it, is that we can virally impact the world in a really positive way with the information a lot of times people just won't take the time to work out. So really appreciate it if you do that. And no matter what, I will look forward to working with you in the next live stream. I believe this is week 4 live stream. I don't even think I said that at the beginning here. I was so caught up in the subject. So I'll see you in week 5, if not before then. Take care. I'll talk to you then.